Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be breaking down the patch 10.5 changes and discussing how the changes will affect each of the champions placing in the meta. We'll also take a look at the item changes later on in the video. So first we'll take a look at the champions getting buffed, second we'll take a look at champions getting nerfed, and we'll finish off with the item and rune changes. If I do remember, I will include timestamps down below, so if you want to jump ahead to a certain champion or do a certain item, you can do that down below. We start things off here with the champions getting buffed though. First up is Kayn, so he's getting two different changes. One to his passive, his orb spawn rate is going to be increased by around 3%, and his W slow is being increased by 10%. So honestly, if Kayn were to come back into the meta, it would not be due to these changes. It would be due to the fact that he's gotten indirect buffs in previous patches. With tanks coming back a little bit more, Kayn tends to do really well into like a tank jungle meta or into just a tank meta in general. So if we do see Kayn come back, it's going to be because of that, and I just don't think that these changes will be enough to bump him up into S tier, so I do still think he remains an A tier jungler for 10.5. So another jungler getting buffed, Graves, his base MR is being increased, MR per level being increased there by a little bit, Q mana cost being decreased from 60 scaling to 80 down to 60 at all ranks now, so a decent change there once you get that Q maxed out. Q cooldown being decreased as well by 1 second at all ranks, so similar to the Kayn changes, I just don't think it's quite enough to bump Graves up into S tier. He's definitely going to be one of the better junglers for 10.5 here. I do think that he's like on the verge of S tier, but I do still think he remains an A tier jungler for another patch. Now Lissandra getting a pretty small change, AP ratio on our Q being increased by 0.1% there, so nothing really big for Lissandra. Lissandra's not in the best spot right now for solo queue in the mid lane, so I don't really expect things to change with this buff here. She will still remain a B tier pick for another patch. So probably the champion getting the most interesting and the biggest changes in 10.5 is Neeko. She's getting a lot of really good buffs here. So attack speed per level being increased from 3 to 3.5, base attack speed also being increased there from 0.645 up to 0.6875, W magic damage being increased there by 20 once you get it maxed out, EAP ratio increased by 0.2%, and then the R shield there being increased from 50 base at rank 1 up to 75, and the AP ratio is also being increase from 0.5 up to 0.75. So Neeko is actually not doing all that bad right now in solo queue in 10.4 here. She's an A tier champion for both the top lane and the mid lane. So with these changes, I can see Neeko bumping up into S tier, especially with this change here to her ultimate. It makes her an even better pick into a lot of assassin mid lane champions. Like at the level 6 there, it's going to be very difficult for champions to look to burst her out with that increase there on the shield. You also get the bonus AP ratio on the E there, so her ability to like be more effective in mid to late game team fights increases for 10.5. I just think that Neeko right now, even in this patch, is one of the better mid laners into like a lot of assassin picks. You can go for the glacial build, you can grab a Zhonya's as your second or third item, and you just overall do a really good job at just neutralizing those picks. So I think definitely watch out for Neeko here in 10.5. Look to pick her up in the mid lane with the glacial build if you are looking for some elo. Now for Twisted Fate, he's getting two different changes for next patch. Blue card AP ratio increased from 0.5 up to 0.9, and then red card AP ratio increased from 0.5 up to 0.7. So these changes are actually pretty nice. This does majorly buff like split push Twisted Fate. If you're going for an AP Twisted Fate build and you're split pushing with him, his blue cards are gonna hurt for a ton now on towers in 10.5 here. Team fighting as TF, I don't think it's really going to change too much, because when you're team fighting with the champion, you're gonna almost always want to be pulling gold cards to look for those picks, look for those stuns, and I think that if anything, these changes will now force you to think a little bit about which card you're pulling in those fights, and if you want to finish off a target, then pulling a blue card would be the right call. If you want to get like some good AoE damage off in a fight, then pulling a red card is going to be more valuable for you for 10.5, so I don't think it's going to be enough to bump him up into S tier. If his gold card got the same kind of buff, he'd definitely jump up into S tier, but I still see TF as a very solid A tier pick for 10.5. Now if we move on to Sivir here, Q base damage is being lowered from 35 scaling to 115 down to 35 scaling to 95, so it is a 20 base decrease, but you do have to take a look and realize that the Q scaling is being increased from 110% AD up to 130%, and I'm pretty sure that is a total AD scaling, so it takes into account all of your AD instead of your bonus AD, so this does end up being a net buff to Sivir for next patch once you do end up getting like at least a BF sort of Once you complete one of your core items, I'm pretty sure this ends up just being a net buff to Sivir. It could end up being like a little bit of a nerf there in the early game if you like fall behind and you can't pick up your items, but overall it should be a buff to Sivir. Our minimum move speed there is being increased as well. It's now going to scale a little bit better once you do put your second and third rank into it. So I do think overall this change will be enough to bump Sivir up into A tier for solo queue. She hasn't been performing very well the past couple patches here, but I do think that with these two changes combined here, it will be enough to make her at least a decent AD carry now for 10.5. And then Kaisa, she is getting a bunch of different changes, but overall they're pretty small for the most part. Her Q AP ratio is being decreased. Q upgraded missiles is being increased there from 10 up to 12, so that's a pretty decent change. W base damage is being increased there. The AP ratio on the W is being increased, but the AD ratio on it is being decreased. And then the upgraded cooldown refund is being increased from 50% up to 70% on the W. So I think overall pretty small changes here to Kaisa. I really don't think these will be enough to propel her back into the AD carry meta. She hasn't been performing very well now for the past like 3 or 4 patches, and I just don't see these changes making her much better coming up here for 10.5. So moving on to a support champ now, Alistar, his base HP is being increased there from 575 up to 600, and then his passive is no longer going to have a cooldown for collecting charges. So once you end up proccing your heal on Alistar from your passive, there's a 3-second cooldown to where you can't gain any more charges until you can stack that heal back up again. So in this coming patch, it's now not going to have any cooldown at all, so you're going to be able to constantly be stacking up your passive there towards that heal. And I think that this change here is actually pretty nice. It's going to increase Alistar's viability for sure in 10.5, and I do think that it will make him now at least an A tier support for solo queue. Now, Sona is getting a revert on the nerf she received in last patch, and this is due to the fact that Spell Thieves is getting nerfed for solo laners here in 10.5. So because of that, she's getting her base AD back now. She's getting her E self movement speed back here for 10.5. So for support, Sona gonna be a very solid pick here for the coming patch. I think that top lane Sona though should be dead now, or it should definitely be a lot weaker than it was before because of the Spell Thieves changes that we're gonna be going over in a little bit. Now, a couple junglers in quotation marks are getting some buffs for this coming patch here. So Darius passive damage to monsters being increased from 120% up to 175%. This champion's sitting at a 40% win rate in the jungle right now in 10.4. This change is not going to do anything to increase Darius's viability in the jungle, so he's still gonna be a C tier pick here for another patch. And then same thing for Mordekaiser here, honestly. He's sitting at, I think, a little bit higher of a win rate, like around 42% in this patch for solo queue, but it's definitely not that much better. And this change here to his passive, max damage to monsters being increased from 25 to 120 up to 28 to 164. It's not really going to do anything for him, so I do expect, like Darius, for Mordekaiser to remain a C tier pick. Now, unlike Darius and Mordekaiser, Poppy Jungle is actually something I think that is very sleeper OP right now. So the fact that it's getting buffed here in 10.5, I think more people are just gonna realize that Poppy's actually not a bad jungler, and they'll start to pick her up here for solo queue. I don't think this change is really gonna break her or anything. It's not gonna make her like an S tier pick, but she is gonna be an A tier jungler for 10.5. Q max damage to non-champions being increased there from 40 to 120, now gonna be 50 to 160. So a nice change there to Poppy Jungle. And like I said, pretty sleeper OP pick. So if you're looking for a new jungler to just try out or add to your pool for 10.5, I would recommend picking up Poppy. Alright, so if we move on to the champions getting nerfed now, the tank assassin is first up here getting some nerfs for 10.5, and honestly, not really going to do anything. Ornn's still going to remain an S tier pick for yet another patch. Brittle damage is being decreased there from 12 to 20.5% of his max HP down to 10 to 18% of his max HP, so it's a somewhat substantial nerf to him, but because of how strong he is right now in 10.4, in my opinion, it's just not going to be enough to bump him out of S tier. His item upgrades for himself along with for his allies, they are being increased for next patch. So for himself, it's going from level 12 up to level 13, and then for his allies, it's going from level 13 up to level 14. And then for Sett here, similar to Ornn, I think these are just pretty light changes overall. Base armor being lowered there from 37 down to 33, base HP regen being lowered, HP regen per level being lowered, and then his ultimate slow duration is being lowered from 1.5 down to 1. So I do still expect, like Ornn, for Sett to be an S tier pick for another patch here, and I feel like both these champions just need like one more nerf. If they just nerf them once more in the coming patch here, it probably would be enough to drop them out of S tier down into A tier. Now, Bard is actually getting nerfed here for 10.5. Believe it or not, he has the highest win rate in solo queue right now in 10.4. I think it's around like 54 or 55%. So I guess it makes sense that he's being nerfed. Passive damage here per 5 chimes is being lowered from 15 down to 12. So once you do get a bunch of chimes collected, you're definitely going to notice the little bit of decrease in damage here. But I think that overall, your carry potential with Bard in solo queue and his placing in the tier list is not going to change with these nerfs. And then Blitzcrank here getting probably the smallest nerf in 10.5 overall. Base armor is being lowered from 40 down to 37, so a pretty insignificant change. I think right now, if you're looking for that carry support down in the bot lane, with Nautilus being nerfed recently, with Leona being nerfed, it does indirectly make Blitzcrank the premier hook support or the premier engage support you can play for 10.5. So we got some changes to Amumu here. Our cooldown is being increased from 130 up to 150 at rank 1. It's going to be the same at rank 3 in next patch here. So I'm pretty sure this is just like a mini revert on the buffs he got last patch. I guess he was performing too well in the lower elos for 10.4. I think he might have had like a 53 or 54% win rate in like gold and below in 10.4. So I guess that's why they're reverting these changes here. I think that for majority of elos, he is going to be an A tier pick in 10.5. And then Rammus, I'm pretty sure he is also getting a little revert on the changes he got in last patch. So his base attack speed is going to be lowered back down to 0.625 instead of 0.656. So with the Cinderhalt changes in last patch, both these junglers did get indirectly stronger and they ended up buffing them as well. So I think that's why they're going back on these changes. They already got stronger because of the Cinderhalt buff. So there wasn't really too much of a reason to actually directly buff them. So for some item and rune changes now for next patch, we got a bunch of different changes here to some top lane items, and then we got some changes to boots as well as spell thieves. So if we go over Ravenous Hydra first, lifesteal being increased there from 12% up to 18%, and then active radius on it is being increased from 400 up to 450. So immediately when I see these changes here, I think a Fiora buff, Camille buff, Kled buff. I guess you have like a Renekton buff there as well. And there's probably a few other champions that I'm forgetting, but definitely a really good buff to Fiora for next patch, along with Camille there. I think they're going to be the two champions that benefit from these changes the most, and I think that both these champions could potentially now bump up into S tier because of the buff to this item. And then for the Titanic Hydra buffs here, I don't think these are as insane as the Ravenous Hydra buffs, but overall they're still pretty nice. Max HP damage to primary targets there being increased from 1% up to 1.5%, and max HP damage to secondary targets increased from 2.5% up to 3%. So this is more so of a buff to Shen here. I think Shen's probably going to benefit the most out of these changes. You also got Kled, who does go for Titanic sometimes. You got Jax, Aurelia. I think those are the 4 champions that usually build this item the most, and I think that Shen is going to be a very good pick now here for 10.5. He already did benefit a ton from the Sunfire buffs in last patch, so with these buffs here as well, he's just getting his 2 core items buffed 2 patches in a row. Now, Blade the Ruined King here is getting kind of a weird change for next patch. Melee basic attack current health damage being increased from 8% up to 12%. So this is actually a pretty significant buff, and I'm pretty sure there's no top laner or no melee champion in this patch right now that actually builds this as a core item, at least not off the top of my head. I can't really think of a melee champion that builds Bork at the moment, but in this coming patch here, if the enemy team has like a tank jungle, tank top laner, tank support, then I could see certain top laners go for this like as a second or third item later on into the game. We could see like Fiora grab it, could see Jax grab it, Camille, Kled. Like there's a lot of different top laners that could pick this up. Actually, I think that Renekton might have been a top laner like in last season or previously here that did sometimes go for Bork. He might have been like one of the only top laners, but I just think overall for next patch, this item isn't gonna like break any top lane champion, or it shouldn't. It should just now mean that in certain situations, you will see some top laners pick this item up. Alright, well, it's a step in the right direction for sure with these Mobi Boots nerfs. I just think that Mobi Boots, like especially for mid lane champions that rush it, is just so annoying. Like there's just no real counterplay to it. You spam ping your teammates to back off when the enemy Talon or Qiyana is roaming with Mobis. They just don't do it, and they just pick up a ton of free kills. Like it's so uninteractive, the Mobi Boot strategy, and I feel like these nerfs are going to hurt them a little bit. Is it really going to stop you from buying Mobi Boots on those kind of champions? I don't think so. It's still going to be a good purchase on picks like the Talon Qiyana is still going to be good on most support champions. So it is a bit of a nerf, but I don't think it's really going to affect champions too much. Now, Swifty Boots here, it is getting a move speed increase from 55 up to 60, so if anything in this next patch, some players might actually start going for Swifties instead of Mobi Boots, so you might see some support champions actually pick up the Swifties now instead of Mobis. I'm pretty sure there are a couple supports in this patch right now that are actually building Swifties instead of Mobis, so this is just going to be even better for them here for 10.5. This is also a buff to like certain AD carry champions. I know sometimes like you'll see MF want to go Swifties, you'll see Jin want to go Swifties instead of going for like the attack speed or the armor boost. Like if he doesn't need the armor from Tabbies, if he doesn't need the MR from the Merc Treads, then I think Swifties, nice little buff here to certain AD carries for 10.5. And then lastly here to round out the video, support starting items are all getting nerfed for 10.5. You can now only trigger the effect of getting that extra gold if you do it while near an ally. This is supposed to be targeted towards nerfing the Sona top. Honestly though, I think that if you still want to play the roaming Sona top, you could still make it work for 10.5. You could just start with Doran's Ring, you could CS normally in the laning phase, and then once you do hit the level 6, you can just look to roam around the map. I don't think it's going to completely kill it off. It is going to be a nerf to support champions though, because for example, if you're trying to proc your Spelthies in the laning phase and your AD carry is walking back to lane, you're not going to be able to get those procs. So it's a straight up nerf to like for pretty much every support champion in the game, but they're doing this because they do want to try to kill off the Sona top lane. Alright, so that's going to be it, guys. That's going to round out the video. Hopefully you now do have a pretty good idea of how these 10.5 changes are going to affect champions heading into this coming patch. So if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.